In 1844, John Snow set up his practice as a general surgeon and a practitioner here at 54 Firth Street. Now today, it is currently a bakery, but back then this was his first medical office. He was perfecting the dosage for chloroform and ether as a use of anesthesia in childbirth. In 1854, it was the height of the third cholera pandemic in London. John Snow had published a paper in 1849, 3 years into the cholera pandemic, titled On the Mode of Communications of Cholera. He was determined to find proof that cholera wasn't spread by the air. As you can see right now, the air is not that hazy or pea soup as was referred to back in those days. But a lot of people thought people were getting sick from cholera because of the bad air. However, John Snow did not believe the miasma theory. He thought there had to be something else that was transmitting the disease. However, Pasteur's germ theory hadn't been invented yet, and so he believed that there was something in the water. So he started one of his experiments. So back in 1854, Soho had no plumbing, which means that all of these buildings had cesspools underneath them. It got so bad that families started paying the government to take their sewage away, and it ended up being dumped in the Thames, which polluted the Thames. Many water suppliers drew water from the Thames, while there were a couple water suppliers that drew water from purer sources. John Snow was trying to figure out why the cholera pandemic was happening, and so he was looking at where everybody got their water from, what company they got them from, and where the outbreaks were. That didn't seem to correlate to the spotting that was around this pump and all the people who drew their water from this pump. The reason the pump was contaminated is that there was a cesspool underneath the building next to the pump, and potentially the cesspool broke and some of the bacteria from the cesspool leaked into the well for the pump that was dug very, very shallow, which is why many people were getting sick. He determined that people who were getting water from impure sources were the ones that were getting sick, while the ones who were getting water from pure sourced companies were fine. However, that didn't explain the cases that were around the water pump at Broad Street. So in 1854, this was considered the site of the third cholera pandemic. John Snow mapped the entirety of Soho. He determined that there were multiple cases around an intersection of Broad Street and Cambridge Street. This is where the pump was located. So they removed the handle. He helped work at the city, remove the handle to make sure that nobody would continue to get sick. And so John Snow expanded upon his 1849 paper in 1855 with results from the epidemic. He cited a fecal-oral route of transmission. However, the government rejected this theory because the idea was too gross for the public to contemplate. John Snow continued to work with ether and chloroform as an anesthetic. He never patented his work on ether. Within 2 years of ether being used as an anesthetic, he became the most sought-after general surgeon in London. And so every year, the John Snow Society meets at this pub right here that was erected in honor of John Snow. The society ceremoniously removes the pump handle to commemorate what John Snow did for the field of epidemiology. It is important to note that John Snow was an active member of the temperance movement. John Snow is often credited with ending the cholera pandemic and bringing about sanitation changes and improvements in London. However, the cholera pandemic was declared over in 1860, 6 years after his famous experiment. His suggestion to the local government helped reduce the number of cases in Soho, but people throughout London were still getting cholera from contaminated water. After the epidemic had subsided, the government of Soho replaced the handle on the pump because, as previously stated, to acknowledge that John Snow's route of transmission was correct was gross.